Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to welcome you all to our virtual Intrepid adventure today, Codebreakers. My name is Franz. I'm a museum educator at the Intrepid Sea and Space Museum, where our mission is to honor our heroes, educate the public, and inspire our youth. We do that by doing lots of different programs like this one. As I said before, you guys are here for Codebreakers. Please join us for our new virtual programming here on Facebook and YouTube. You can find out more information at intrepidmuseum.org. But today, we're going to be talking about espionage and spying and what that is like. And we're also going to be talking about trying to keep pilots safe, right? And the way that we can keep pilots safe is by keeping them concealed in the sky, right? If they're in planes, or keeping their information concealed by encoding them. So we're going to be talking about that in various forms today, okay? So if you guys would like, you can let us know where you're tuning in from in the comment section in the chat. You can let us know where you're tuning in. You can also let us know if you've ever visited the Intrepid via physically or virtually. We'd love to know. We'd love to see like where people are coming from and what experience you guys have, okay? So let's begin our program today by taking a look here at this, right? This is a Lego model of the Intrepid. And yes, you heard me correctly. I said Lego. This model is made entirely out of Legos. 250,000 Lego pieces make up this model, right? And it's gigantic because the Intrepid is gigantic, 913 feet long. What does that mean? Well, that means that if you took the ship and you stood it up on its end, it'd almost be as tall as a skyscraper. It is gigantic, right? But what's really important about the Intrepid is what we see at the top there, right? The Intrepid is what we call an aircraft carrier. It had the ability to launch and land those aircrafts just like an airport that was in the water, right? So that's why the Intrepid was involved with aviators, right? So as I said before, we're going to want to keep our aviators safe, right? And the way that we can do this is by concealing them in plain sight, right? By using camouflage, right? We can actually camouflage gigantic hunks of metal. Now, before we begin and start examining planes that use camouflage, what we're going to do now is actually learn about some of the types of camouflage, right? Because you guys might know different animals that have camouflage, right? We really tend to look at animals when we talk about these types of camouflage. But you guys can let me know in the comments if you know any animals that utilize camouflage, any famous animals or any animals that maybe we don't know, right? But this is what we're going to do. We're going to talk about 4 different types. There's more than this, but we're going to focus on these 4 types, okay? So the first form of camouflage we're going to talk about is disruptive camouflage. And disruptive camouflage is using different colors and patterns together to kind of confuse onlookers, right? When people look at this pattern, it might be hard to figure out where things are among all of the different colors and shapes, right? And a very, very good example of this, zebras, right? A herd of zebras. A herd of zebras had these stripes, these contrasting colors, white and black. And when you put them together, it's sometimes hard to realize how many zebras are actually in that herd, right? So that's going to be our first form of camouflage, right? Disruptive. Our next form of camouflage that we're going to be kind of looking out for when we look at our planes is mimicry. Right? And mimicry is literally copying what something looks like in order to look and appear as something else, right? And a lot of times it's appearing to look like something a little bit more fierce or scary, right? And a very good example of this are butterflies, right? Some butterflies have this color pattern, and these colors, right? That make it look like an owl, right? Make it look like a bird. So maybe other birds might not mess with this butterfly, right? So we call this mimicry. The third form of camouflage we're going to talk about is counter shading. And counter shading is literally having 2 sides of different colors, right? Usually of high contrasting colors. So the top part or the back part is usually a darker color, and the bottom part is usually a lighter color, right? And we can see this being the case in nature when we look at penguins, right? Penguins use counter shading because their backs are actually darker in color and their bottoms are white. And this is used to blend in with 2 different things. to blend in with the darkness of the ocean below the penguins, and also to blend in with the light above the penguin, right? So that way that it can camouflage in two different ways. And the last form of camouflage that we're going to talk about is obscuring. And this is probably the most famous form of camouflaging. This is literally hiding in plain sight, being the same color and same type of pattern as things that are around you, so that way you can blend directly in, right? And a very famous animal for this is the snow hare, right? The snowshoe hare, excuse me. So the snowshoe hare here has and is adapted to have this white coat, this white fur, so that way it can blend in with the snow all around it, right? And I see my friend Patrick Irwin in the comment section wrote lizards, cuttlefish, octopus, chameleons, and frogs. Yes, all of these animals utilize camouflage in some way, shape, or form. So we're going to actually go through the museum. And actually, the first thing we're going to look at is not a plane. We're going to look and see how camouflage was used on a gigantic ship, right? Now, the Intrepid would have been in the ocean. So camouflaging in the middle of the ocean might be a lot harder than we can think, right? So this is what we're going to do, ladies and gentlemen. I want you all to look at this model of the Intrepid. And then I'm going to give you a couple of choices. You'll see them pop up on the screen. And I want you to write the number for whatever choice you think is the correct form of camouflage that we're seeing being used by the ship or the plane, right? So this form of camouflage is called dazzle paint, and it was used during World War II, right? So we can see it along the side of the Intrepid. We can see these block kind of colors, right? Black, white, gray. So this is my question to you all. Is it disruptive camouflage, mimicry, counter shading, or obscuring? Which type of camouflage do you think the Intrepid is using? Is it using disruptive camouflage? You can write 1 in the comment for disruptive. Is it using mimicry? You can write 2 in the comments for mimicry. Is it using counter shading? You can write 3 in the comments for counter shading. And is it using 4? You can put 4 for obscuring. Okay, so which type of camouflage is this using? And as you look at this, you might start noticing that because it has these contrasting colors, and because it's kind of like these really blocky looking block shapes, right? It might be using disruptive camouflaging, right? Disruptive camouflaging, that's what it's using. Number 1, right? How is it using disruptive camouflaging? Well, it has those contrasting colors. This is what Intrepid normally looks like, right? Well, what it looks like now in this low visibility gray, right? But the Intrepid and other ships kind of used to look like this during World War II. And this is ships using dazzle paint. In this image is about 3 ships, I believe. Sometimes it looks like 2, sometimes it looks like 3. You can see there's kind of 1 here, there's 1 in the middle here, and there's a larger one right over here, right? So 3 ships, right, all kind of meshed together to look like one big ship. We can see dazzle paint being used here, kind of look like stripes. And this one is one of my favorites. It's not necessarily, it is dazzle paint, but it's not dazzle paint like we've been seeing. This ship actually has a wave painted on its hull to kind of look like it's moving faster than it actually is. And this is to confuse onlookers, right? So that way we can hide a ship, a large ship, in plain sight. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I just want to remind you all that throughout the program, if you have any questions or any comments, feel free to type them into the comment section. We love to see them and hopefully get to answer them, okay? Now, moving on, we can check out another plane, or our first plane here at the museum. My favorite plane, as everyone knows, this is my favorite plane at the museum. This is the Avenger airplane. It is the oldest airplane in our collection. It's from World War II, right? And it is a torpedo bomber, right? But when we look at the Avenger and we look at its patterns, its colors, its schemes, right? What type of camouflage do we think this is using? Once again, in the comment section, you can write 1 for disruptive, 2 for mimicry, 3 for counter shading, and 4 for obscuring, right? Looking around the Avenger here, we can see the color schemes, right? We can see there's different color schemes. what type of camouflage do we think that the Avenger is using? And I'm looking in the comments. I see Patrick Irwin pointed out that he's seen tanks and other Army vehicles use green color camouflaging to cover into green areas. That's a really great observation. We'll talk about that a little bit later. And I'm seeing some 3s in the comment section for counter shading. And ladies and gentlemen, that is the correct answer. Right, lots of 3s in the comment sections for counter shading. This plane, in fact, is using counter shading. It's using a method of camouflage called counter shading. The top part of it is blue. What do we all think the blue is meant to blend in with? You guys can let me know in the comment section. What does the blue blend in for the Avenger? And the underside is white. So what does the white blend in with? Right. This is blending in with 2 different things. As the color of the top part of it is blue and the bottom is white. It's actually blending in perfectly with the dark blue of the ocean underneath it and the sky from above, right? Or when you look above, right? So the Avengers are a really, really good example of counter shading. Right now, ladies and gentlemen, these planes. Oh, another example of counter shading in nature that we see is shark, right? And we can see here Avengers flying in the sky with that counter shading. Now, these planes wouldn't be just in this area. This whole area is known as the hangar deck or the hangar level. These planes would actually be going upstairs, right? And they would go upstairs when they were ready to take off. They would move these gates out of the way here. You'd push the plane out onto an aircraft elevator, which you're going to see here. It's actually in its up position in this video. So right now we can't see the ledge, but right now this thing would come down, you push the airplane out, and it'd go upstairs in just 7 seconds. So that's actually what we're going to do right now. All right. So this is a picture of one of the aircraft elevators bringing up what's called the tracer, right? So here, on top of the Intrepid, we have the MiG-21, right? Very, very fast jet plane. But if you can check out back here, you can see that this plane here actually doesn't belong to the United States Navy. It belongs to the Vietnamese military, right? So this is a Vietnamese plane, and it's painted in the colors of the Vietnamese markings of the plane that it would have been flying when it would have been flying during Vietnam, right? So when we look at the MiG-21, the supersonic jet, we can see it has very distinct colors on it. So my question now, obviously, right, is which type of camouflage does this one use? Is it using disruptive camouflage? Is it using mimicry? Is it using counter shading or obscuring, right? Thinking about what we talked about earlier, right? And thinking about things that we've seen earlier. What type of camouflage do we think the MiG-21 is using, right? It has this green coloring at the top with white at the bottom. So if you are saying counter shading, you'd be correct, right? This is using counter shading, right? I do see some 4s in the comments as well, and it kind of could be obscuring, right? Because it is kind of blending in with something specifically. But we call this one counter shading because of where it's going to be flying. It's going to be flying over the jungles in Vietnam, right? So as it's flying over the trees, it's going to blend in with the trees underneath it, the foliage underneath it. And if you look up, it's going to blend in with the sky, right? Now, the MiG-17 had a little brother, right? I like to call his little brother. It's called the MiG-17. We have that plane at the Intrepid as well. It's right here. This is the MiG-17. But looking at the MiG-17, which camouflage do you think this one uses? Disruptive, mimicry, counter shading, or obscuring, right? If we look at the patterns and the color of this plane, where might it fly, right? And where might it try to be blending in with? Now, I will say this about the MiG-17. The MiG-17, although it was pretty fast, it was slower than the MiG-21. And both of these planes, or specifically the MiG-17, is what we call a dogfighter, right? It is a fighter jet. It's going to be fighting other planes in the sky, right? And because it's going to be flying in the sky and maneuvering among the clouds, this one is painted to not only look like the sky, but look like the clouds around it as well. So if you said obscuring for this one, you'd be correct. This one's going to be using obscuring camouflage to obscure itself in plain sight in the sky using all of these colors. Now, a very good example of obscuring camouflage is right here in this image. You all can let me know in the comments if you can pinpoint where exactly something is hiding. I won't even tell you what it is, but there's something hiding in this image. And I'll give you guys a couple of seconds to try to figure out where it's hiding and what it is, all right? And if you look closely toward the middle of the image, you'll see an owl hiding in plain sight. Sorry to see, I'll put a little circle around it for you. There it is. Right there, the owl is, right? The owl is perched right there in the tree, looking at onlookers, right? Now, right next to the MiG-17, we have this interesting one, right? This is the Crusader, a very fast supersonic jet that was flown by the United States Navy, right? Very famous specifically for what we're looking at here, right? It looks like something, right? It looks like a shark, right? It appears to have teeth like a shark. So I want us to use our imaginations here. What type of camouflage is the Crusader using, right? Is it using disruptive camouflage, mimicry, counter shading, or obscuring, right? Or is it even using any type of camouflage? Some people say that it doesn't even use camouflage, right? But if we're kind of really stretching our imagination, if we're really thinking about this and how this thing could possibly kind of hide in plain sight, we might think that it's kind of mimicking something, right? Because it looks like a shark. It's mimicking a shark. And as I said before, when things mimic things, sometimes they did it to look more fierce, right? So does this look like a shark flying through the sky? No, it doesn't, right? But would it kind of strike a little fear in the hearts of people who looked at it while they were flying? Maybe. And there's other animals that do this as well, right? So for instance, this right here is the coral snake, right? And the coral snake is a very, very dangerous snake, right? It is the second most venomous snake, I think, in North America. And so when red touches yellow, you know that this is bad, right? Because red touches yellow, kill a fellow. That's how the rhyme goes, which means you don't want to be near this thing. But there's milk snake that kind of looks like the coral snake. Looks a little something like this. It kind of looks similar with those colors, but if you look closely, the red is actually touching the black. And the way that the rhyme finishes is red touches black, poison lack. So that means that milk snake is safe because the red's touching the black bands, and the coral snake is not because the red is touching the yellow bands, which isn't good, right? So before we continue, I just wanted to see, are there any questions? Do you guys have any questions about any of the things that we've seen so far? Maybe any of the planes, any questions at all? Oh, so someone asked, are Avengers still flown in the Navy today? Unfortunately, they are not, right? As time progressed, we got more technologically advanced with our planes. So jet planes took over. And although we still use propeller planes, planes like the Avenger are a little bit obsolete, a little bit too old, right? The Avenger is actually known as the Turkey because it was the best looking flying thing, kind of flew all over the place. But they did use Avengers later, kind of as like used as like a firefighter deterrent. So they would actually open up the bottom instead of dropping bombs, they would drop out water, right? And they also do it to also water crops as well. So they did find other uses for the Avenger, although it's not used for war anymore. All right. Do airplanes use dazzle paint too? So airplanes do use dazzle paint in some way, shape, or form. Sometimes they kind of have like these crazy designs on them that kind of make them harder to spot in the sky. But when we are dealing with jet power planes, we'll talk about this in a little bit. When we deal with jet power planes, we're dealing with way faster planes. So radar is going to be used. And so we have to not only trick eyes, we also have to trick the radar. And so we'll talk about how we're going to trick the radar in a little bit. So let's continue. So keep going down the line of planes on Intrepid's flight deck. We have this plane. And this plane is pretty interesting, right? This one's not necessarily using camouflage in a way to deter people. It's actually using camouflage as a way to get people's attention, right? Now, this plane here is known as the Mentor. And it's called the Mentor specifically because it's used to mentor or to train pilots. This is a Navy pilot training plane. Now, if you've ever taken any driver's ed courses or seen a driver's ed car going down the street, you'll notice that you can always spot it, right? It has the thing on the top of the hood. Sometimes it has a bunch of stickers on it, some reflecting tape, right? And this is just to remind people that this person that's driving this car is learning. So you got to give them a little bit of leniency. You got to kind of give them a little bit of a break. But also, you should probably steer clear of them because just in case they kind of go out of control, you won't be in that area, right? So that was the same thing for the Mentor. That's why the Mentor is painted in this red color, right? Red and white, because it's highly visible, right? So while this thing is flying in the sky, you're going to be able to see it and know to kind of steer clear from it, right? And in nature, there are animals that do the same thing. For instance, frogs, right? Frogs have this very high color contrast and bright, vibrant colors to draw the attention to it, to tell people and animals to stay away from it, right? It's almost like a red stop sign. So that way it gets the attention to make you stop, right? Now, right next to it, we have something else with similar markings. You all can let me know in the comments what you think this helicopter was used for. But looking at the colors, looking at the markings, you might be able to kind of deduce that this was used to rescue people. It kind of looks like an ambulance, right? So why is it using red and white, these vibrant colors that you can easily spot? Well, it's kind of taking something from the animal kingdom as well. Peacocks, right? When we have a peacock, the peacock has all of these bright feathers to attract the mate, right? To attract a peacock to come near it, right? This is used kind of in a similar fashion. We are making red and white more prominent on the helicopter, so that way it's easier to spot for anyone that's lost in the water. All right, so that's what makes those particular planes' colors actually help them stand out, right? Now, going farther down on the Intrepid flight deck here, we can see this plane. Now, this plane would have never taken off from the Intrepid. This is the fastest plane ever built. This is the A-12, right? And went Mach 3 times faster than the speed of sound. It went up about 80,000 feet, so high that the pilot had to wear a pressurized suit to breathe, right? And its main job, its only job, was to spy on the Soviet Union, right? So this was like a glorified camera, right? It was supposed to fly at that height, fly at that speed, and take pictures of the Soviet Union. Although it never did that, though it never actually did the mission, it did fly, and it was pretty successful. Now, looking at this, you can probably tell some things right off the bat, right? Like, for instance, if I told you that this was a camouflage plane, you could probably tell me in the comments when this plane would be flown, right? If this plane was a spy plane used to spy on the Soviet Union, when would it be flown, right? I see Patrick in the comments is saying the SR-71 Blackbird, bringing up the SR-71 Blackbird, which is the predecessor to the A-12. I like to say it's like the little brother of the A-12, and it had a similar mission. And you might have heard of the SR-71 Blackbird if you're into X-Men, because that's the X-Jet is a version of the SR-71 Blackbird. But this was flown at night, right? It was flown at night. Now, as I said before, when it came down to tracking planes, we stopped relying so much on our eyes and started relying more on radar. So when it came to trying to find the A-12, yeah, that's going to be a problem now because they're going to be using radar. But the A-12 had special paint on it. The A-12's paint actually had radar deflecting properties. So actually it took the radar and scattered it. And it made it look like the plane was bigger than it was, or the plane was moving at a slower speed or coming in a different direction. So the camouflage worked as for sight, right? Painting it black, but it also worked against the radar, right? By having this radar deflecting paint on it. So this is just us looking at the A-12 here, checking it out, getting a good look at it. It's very, very long airplane. It's so powerful that you needed a starter engine to start up the engine. So you needed an engine to start up the engines to start up the plane. That's how powerful these engines were here. Also, the engines needed a little bit of air because of all the power was generating. So you have flapper doors, and these doors were just letting ventilation into the engine, right? So the A-12 was a marvelous piece of spy technology that used camouflage and radar deflecting paint in order to hide in plain sight, right? So, as I mentioned before, all of these planes and all of the methods that we just talked about were just used specifically to make sure that the pilots and the sailors were safe while they were on their missions. But now we're going to talk about how we can also keep sailors and pilots safe by keeping our communication secret. We're going to talk about how we can use codes as a way to do this, right? So we're going to look here, back on Intrepid's flight deck. And now we're going to go right up there to what we call the island, right? The island is the area where you're going to have navigation, communications, also where you're going to be literally steering the ship, where the helm is. So let's go up here and check out some of the ways that we're going to communicate in this area, right? So as we walk into the navigation bridge, we'll look around and we'll see maps for plotting, for figuring out where we're going while we're at sea. We're going to see other instruments that will help us out with navigation as well, right? Like radar. Like we can see there's a radar station here on the navigation bridge as well. When we go over to the front, closer to the bow of the ship, excuse me, we're going to see this board here. And this board's very interesting. If you look very closely at the board, you'll notice some words, right? You'll see words like New Jersey. You'll see words like Intrepid, and you'll see words like Powell, excuse me. These are the names of ships. And because, sorry, I had to sneeze. And because these ships are in what we call a fleet or a group of ships, they are arranged in a certain way to keep the formation safe, right? And keep the sailors safe in this formation. Now, at a certain time, the Intrepid was what was called a flagship, or the most important ship in the fleet. So that's why the Intrepid, as you can see here on this plotting point, is in the middle of the entire fleet formation. It is being protected by everyone because it had the important job of having these planes take off and land from the flight deck, right? Now, one thing that's very interesting also on the outside of this room is the fact that we can't see really in front of us, right? Because as we look out this way, we can see the water, we can see New York, but when we look out right in front of us here, there's a lot of flight deck and a lot of planes, right? We can't see directly in front of us. So we're going to have to use compasses. We're going to have to rely on a lot of different instruments in order to navigate, right? It's also hard to figure out how we're going to talk to everyone at the same time. So right over here, we have what's called a sound-powered telephone. It may look like a regular telephone, ladies and gentlemen, but this one is going to use the power and the physical properties of vibrating voices, right? It's going to vibrate wax paper, move it along the line, and so that other people can hear it. This is like if you've ever done the experiment where you took the plastic cups or the paper cups, excuse me, and you put the string in between them. That is solid objects allowing sound waves to travel through them. And that's exactly what we're going to do with sound power telephones. Now, why are we going to do this? Well, it just adds a level of security to our messages, right? Instead of talking over a telephone or a cell phone that can actually get kind of feed into, they didn't have cell phones back then, but you know what I mean. They can actually use these sound power telephones in order to communicate. Now, if you don't have a sound power telephone, you can use another piece of metal in order to communicate throughout the ship. And you may have used one of these, maybe if you've ever been to a playground. Sometimes they have these at playgrounds. And we're going to go back inside to the navigation bridge to find this thing. Right? It's going to be shaped like a horn that you can speak into, almost like a megaphone. Right? And these, what you see right here, is a talk tube. You literally talk right into this metal tube, and your voice gets traveled down this pipe all the way down to receivers throughout the ship. And so you can communicate with whoever you like to just using the talk tubes. Now, you have been noticing that this is communicating between individuals on the ship, right? But what if you had to talk to people outside the ship, on another ship, right? What if you had to convey a message that you didn't want other people to hear or to decipher? Well, that's where you're going to use codes, right? So one of the most famous codes that we're going to use is this code. This code is called International Morse Code. This is a code that we all use for Morse Code. It's a way to use dashes and dots in order to spell out words. So what we're going to do right now is I'm going to give you guys some Morse code to figure out. And I want you all to look at this key, right? And the key is pretty much what you need in order to crack a code, in order to solve a code. I want you all to look at this key and find the corresponding sound to this Morse code. Now, just to give you an idea what this sounds like, a dash is going to be a longer sounding sound, where the dot is going to be a shorter sounding sound. This is what this sounds like, right? So this is what, for instance, I'm going to put the letter I. I'm going to play the letter I. This is because the letter I shows you what dots sound like. So this is what the letter I sounds like. And we'll turn this up just a bit so we can hear this. This is what the letter I sounds like again. One more time. So you can hear how quickly those dots, we can hear those dots, right? And then a dash, I'm going to do the letter T because that's just one dash, right? So this is the letter T. So you can hear the difference between the two. Once again, this is what a dot sounds like. This is what a dash sounds like. Okay, so I'm going to spell a word, and I want you all to write in the comments what word I'm spelling in Morse code. All right, so here we go. So this is the full word. Okay, so that was the full word. It's 4 letters. So what we're going to do is do this one letter at a time. So this is the first letter. This is the second letter. This is the third letter. And this is the last letter. All right, one more time. I'm going to play it through the entire word. It's the first letter, second letter, third letter, and last letter. Last letter, once again, is. So if you're having trouble with figuring that out, I'll give you guys a little bit of a hint. The hint is the word I was spelling is the ship speak for the left side of the ship, right? If you know ship speak, you know that starboard is the right side of the ship And if you know ship speak and you solve that Morse code, you know that left is port. And I see that Luciana, if I pronounced that right, got that right in the comments. She wrote the word port exactly. So we were spelling port using Morse code, right? Now, Morse code is one way that we can communicate with other ships, right? Another way that we can communicate with ships is using flags, right? And how can we use flags? Well, right over the side here, I have some flags that I laid out on the ground here. And I use these particular flags because I had a message. The message that I have is specifically, I wish I had this thing when I was going up the stairs this particular day. I wish I had this thing with me. It would have made it a lot easier. So this is the signal flags here. And if you can find the corresponding flag with the corresponding letter, you can decipher this message, right? So when we look here at this signal flag code, and we look and see what the first letter is, what the second letter is, and the third letter is, you can probably let me know that what I really wish I had going up these stairs was a bag. Because I had so many things to carry, so many things to put away. I wish I had a bag with me this particular day, right? Now, that's all well and good, right? Solving this code, looking for A equals B equals C, right? Like kind of doing it that way. But what if you wanted to add another layer to the code? Well, you can do this. Now, what I'm going to do is bring up, once again, these signal flags. I'm also going to bring up the key as well. And if we look at this, we can see that this, which is actually on Intrepid, spells something interesting. And if you look closely at the letters, it might look like I kind of messed up, right? It might look like I misspelled something, because what we get is N, B, Q, and K, right? Which is so strange, right? N, B, Q, K. What does that spell? What is that describing? Well, that is actually describing Intrepid's call name, right? That's another nickname for Intrepid. And it's a way that we can get this message across to other ships without other enemies finding out what this means. Because let's say that you crack this code and you figured out that the blue checkered one is N, the red one with the little cut in it is B, the yellow one is Q, and the yellow and blue one is K. If we figured that out, we might say, what does that spell? What does that mean, right? We don't even know what that means. So adding layers of codes to your code actually makes it harder to crack, right? So looking at all of these codes, looking at all of the stuff and seeing how people can use camouflage and different codes in order to encode messages, we can see how they use this stuff in order to encode their messages on Intrepid. So I hope you all learned a lot today, and I hope you enjoyed learning about this these codes and camouflage. But I just want to open the floor to see if there's any last minute questions. Do they still use these codes in the military today? Yes, they still use signal flag code, and they still use Morse code as well. Now, you probably are wondering, well, if they have the codes and these codes are so readily available, how do we do this? Well, they use the codes in their own special way, right? So they do use it the way that we're talking about, but they have even more codes. Like, for instance, each one of these flags, they don't only necessarily mean a letter, they also can mean an entire phrase. So if you see one flag waving around, flying around, it could mean that there was someone overboard or that you needed fuel. And that's another code that they put onto these flags as well. How many planes do you have at the museum now? I believe in total, we have about 26 or 28 aircraft in total. So it's planes and helicopters. We also have the very first space shuttle ever built. And with that, the aircraft collection, we have the fastest plane, the A-12, and the fastest commercial jet ever built, the Concorde. And we even have a submarine as well. And I know that there was someone who was saying that they hope that we're opening very soon. We are opening soon. We're super excited to say that we're opening next week on a augmented schedule. But we would love to have you guys come in if it's safe for you to come in to see some of this stuff in person. All right. Are there any other last minute questions? No? All right. So I want to thank you all so much for joining us once again. Join us next week for our next Intrepid adventure, which is going to be next Tuesday. And enjoy the rest of your day. All right. Bye, everyone.